Delving into the world of animation here, I want to take a look at a head turn. So I'm just in Photoshop, I'm on my Cintiq, and I'm going to just do this simply. So I'm not using any special software. Photoshop is fine for doing simple animations, especially frame-by-frame animation. So what I have here is a guide, or kind of a map, of how I want this head turn to be. So here's our character. It's very simple. He's a circle. And then if you draw across, in the middle of his face would be his big old bulbous nose, and then he's got two little eyes, eyebrows, and he's got a mouth. So this is kind of looks like Man, if you know that character. But really, he's just a very simple character, and then from the side, same thing, but he would look like got the big old nose like this way, there, this, that. Okay, so this is the model for our character. Very simple. You could add hair to this, you could add ears to this, and this could be a variety of characters if you think about it. Or it could be a girl with a big nose. Why not, right? Or it could be a monster, or it could be another thing. You know, this character could be all sorts of different kind of characters. It could be a robot. But the point is just to have a very simple character to work with. And so this is our little dude. And the nose is big enough that it's going to kind of flop behind. So this is a little bit of secondary motion. But I want to kind of just go over the basic idea here for like a nice head turn. And the basic idea is this. I'm going to erase that. First, you want to give yourself a map. Okay? And then from that map, we can make drawings. If you look here, you can see I have 8 drawings here. And then when we play this, we can see that we've got a little head turn. Okay? So it's a head turn and also a head move. And also he's kind of changing his expression from just nothing to like a little bit of surprise. Oh, what's over there? Oh, what? What? Oh, okay. So that's what we're going for today. And I kind of want to show you how to start that and how to approach it. And this is kind of going to get into some more basic ideas about animation in general. But here's how this works. First, I want to have just a line. It took me a while to say that. So I want to take an idea in my head of what I want the movement to be, this case moving from left to right, and then I want to create an arc or a curve that represents that. So the curve doesn't have to be flat. It could be wavy, it could be sharp, but this is basically going to define the motion. So this is going to be, if the head bobs, then here's a head bob, bob, and then look over, and that's basically going to define the path that he's going to turn on, okay? So when someone turns their head, they don't usually stay stationary, because that means they would have to like plant their neck in the ground and then creepily pivot their head around that and then rotate this way, right? People don't tend to do that. What they tend to do is they tend to move their whole body, or their upper body, their shoulders, and then their neck follows, and then their head comes with that. So that's why I have this motion. It doesn't have to be this big. He could just move from here to here, looking this way and then looking this way, right? It could be a smaller move like that. But I just wanted to exaggerate it a bit so we can see it. But the point is that things move on a path. So it's better to start with that path so you know where things on that path go. Okay, so that's pretty simple. The other thing about arcs, since I'm drawing an arc here, arcs come from circles. And if you draw a circle in perspective or at an angle, you get different kinds of ovals, right? So if you draw through and you draw the whole oval, that's a nice way to pick an arc, because now I can choose how much of this arc I want to use. Okay, I want to use from here to here, and I'm going to use that arc, right? That's a nice thing to do because, for instance, if I wanted him to turn here, and then here he's looking at the camera, and then here he's looking over to the right, I can also give myself an option here, like here, and then now here he's showing us the back of his head, and now here he's back to the same position, looking over to the right. So if you think about this arc in 3D space, you get a lot of options when you draw the whole thing, because then you can just make a tick where you want it to start and end, and you can add your positions there, okay? If that makes sense. By the way, animation is a pretty complicated topic. So if you have questions about it, if you are confused about anything that I'm saying, or if I'm using terminology that's weird, just leave a comment so I can explain it, because I don't want you guys to get lost on this. I love animation. Sometimes I forget what it's like to start doing this stuff and how confusing it can be. So, so anyway, once you have your path, then you want to decide what are the extreme points of that path. So obviously, in this case, here on the left is my starting position. Here on the right is my ending position, okay? I'm not gonna worry about the drawings. I'm not gonna worry about drawing my dude. I'll do that later. What I wanna work out now is space and time. So here's the thing about animation. It happens over time, and it happens like in a graph like this or on a timeline where you can see that as we go along time, we advance the frame. So we get to actually plan that and choose where to put those frames to make the best effect. So the reason that it's so important to plan this stuff is because if you plan it badly, you get really like boring animation. So in this case, I want it to be really snappy. So I have it kind of slow at the beginning and then vroom, and it speeds up. And then at the end, it slows down a little bit. Again, if you watch that, you can see that happening. Oh, I have to turn on the frames for you to see them. So, so you can see that. So he starts on the left slowly, and then boom, he zips around with a blur frame, which we'll go over, and then he slows down a little bit, boom, at the end, okay? So what I'm gonna do here is plan that, and then we'll execute. So we know we have the start, we know that we have the end. We know that the start starts on frame 1, so that's easy. And then we know that this end frame is important, but we don't know where it ends. So we got to think about this. So how fast do we want him to go? So some people use a timer, stopwatch. Some people count in their head, like 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000. Some people tap their foot to a rhythm, like they're, you know, in music. But the basic idea is to get a basic idea, like how many seconds, or is it like half a second? Is it a third of a second? Is it really, really fast? In this case, I want him to be like, which is a little bit less than a second by my timing, 1 1,000. 1 1,000. So that's a little bit less than a second. So I have 8 drawings, and I'm doing this at 24 frames a second, where each drawing is shown for 2 frames. That's called shooting on 2s, which means that I'm getting the effect of 12 frames a second, which is enough to have something this smooth. I'm gonna turn on the frames again, look at me. Which is enough to have something this smooth, which is not hyper smooth, but it's definitely smooth enough for a lot of stuff. So that's shooting on 2s at 24 frames a second, which means effectively 12 frames a second. So that means that in 1 second, I have 12 drawings. So if I want something that's less than a second, that means I need less than 12 drawings. So in this case, I did almost a second. I did 8 drawings, which means that this last frame here is on frame 8. Now, because these are special frames, because they show me where something starts and then ends, I'm going to give myself a note that that's true. And usually we call that a keyframe. So I'm just going to say key 1, right? And this will be key 8. You can do this any way you want, any symbol, any mark that makes sense to you. But basically, a keyframe is anything that shows the extremes of a motion or an emotion or a gesture. And it's the frames that really describe the animation and describe what's happening. Okay, so this frame in the middle, this frame is important too, because something wild is happening here, but it isn't really a keyframe. You could call that a keyframe, but it's not really a keyframe because it's not the extreme, it's in between these. But it is important because without this, without drawing this, no one would know to put this here, right? This is called a blur frame or a distortion frame, where I'm distorting his features because he's moving so fast. If this was like live action film, it would be blurred. So I can't blur a drawing. I mean, I actually could, but I mean, if I'm just drawing it by hand and not using effects and stuff like that, I can't, you know, I'm not going to just go up to filter and then blur. I need to draw it distorted. So I'm basically taking the space of more than one face. I'm taking the space of maybe 2 frames of faces and drawing that into one weird face. And I'm also like elongating the nose along the path that the nose is taking, right? So that's really cool because these are where you get to draw the funnest stuff. You get to draw really weird stuff in these distorted frames where stuff really squashes and stretches and bends and stuff like that. And it doesn't have to follow any rules of anatomy when it's a blur frame, because you're just trying to get the effect of fast motion. And then that you really feel it, but you don't really see it. And so the point of this is that this is an important frame, but it's not a keyframe. So usually you call this a breakdown frame. So we can put BD or just B, or we can put break or whatever. Now we don't know what frame this is on yet, but we know that it's there. So I'm just gonna mark that. And then since I have 8 frames in total, I have 1 frame here, 1 frame here, and 1 frame here. So how many frames does that leave us with? It leaves us with 5. So we have 5 frames to play with. That's our budget. Our animation budget is 5 frames. And they have to go in here somewhere, okay? Now, there's a tendency for people when they're starting out, if you have a line like this, and you have one here, and another one here, then what you want to do is like, oh, I need an in-between frame. That goes right there. So I like to call them, you know, some people call these tweens or in-betweens, but even that word is kind of dangerous, because if you try to put it exactly halfway between, then you get pretty bad animation, because what happens is it smooths everything out and everything just looks like there. Now that one goes here, now that one goes here, now the next one goes here and here, and so on. And what you get is really flat animation that looks mechanical. Now you can draw that, and if you're drawing like and animating a robot or something that's moving really smoothly, then, you know, maybe that might make sense. But for most of the time, this doesn't work very well, because you don't want everything to be smooth. Like in real life, stuff has acceleration and deceleration, which means that it's either speeding up, which would be like this. It's little, then a little bit bigger, 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 then a little bit bigger. So it's speeding up, getting faster and faster, or it decelerates, which means that it starts going fast and then goes, you know, less and less and less and less and less until it slows down, right? So most of things are accelerating or decelerating, including, you know, your body when you're moving, which is why you don't usually want to just split the difference. That generally doesn't work well. So what I recommend doing is, you know, put your breakdown frame in the middle-ish, but don't put it in the middle. Put it like over to that side or put it over to this side, and then it's just going to look more interesting. The other reason is if I draw a drawing here and I draw a drawing here, and I'm pointing my guy's nose here and he's looking this way, and I'm pointing him here and he's looking this way, and then I pick the dead middle, heaven forfend that I pick the dead middle. The problem is I'm also going to be likely to screw up my drawing by trying to draw this dead center guy. And this is just going to be really boring, because you don't really want to have a frame where the guy is just looking dead on. This looks like a, you know, an anatomical drawing, or like a, it's just like, it's not a drawing that you would usually see if you're trying to see something like dynamic and interesting. This drawing, on the other hand, is interesting because there's angles on it and all this stuff, and you can make a lot of that happen just by not picking the middle, picking over here or maybe over here, and then when I do the drawing, I'm already thinking like, oh yeah, he's already coming over here, so now I can have his nose like kind of swinging around or something like that, and I could do something a little bit more interesting, right, with what he's doing. So I always recommend dodging the middle and kind of biasing yourself towards the side. But then the next question becomes, okay, well, but this is only 3 frames. We need 8 frames, so we have 5 more. Where do we put those? And that is up to you. It has to do with what you want to do with the motion. So in this animation down here, what I decided to do was he'd start slow. So I stack them up here. So I put one there, real close. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then that's 8. So I got a couple more here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I need 6, 7, 8. So I got 3 more. So maybe I'll put 1 more there, and I'll put 2 here, right? Like that. Okay. So what I did here was I stacked up a bunch at the beginning, I stacked a couple at the end, and I got one in the middle-ish. And what that's going to do is it's really weighted towards this side. So now he's going to move real slow at the beginning, and then he's going to be like zip, and he's going to speed up, and then at the end there's just a little cushion. So instead of him just going snap right to the end, which would be kind of jarring, he's going to be like ugh. And this is just a little cushion. There's enough frames here that it just slows down a little bit. So okay, but it's not slowing down that much because there's only a couple frames. I could do this. I could erase this one from here and put it here, and then he'd be snapping out of here faster and cushioning more here. So then he would be like Okay, so I do that with sound effects in my voice a lot because it actually really helps me understand the motion. A lot of this is about where does it speed up and where does it slow down, okay? Especially when you're doing in-between drawings, it's really important that you don't just split the difference and cut in the middle and then cut in the middle of that and then cut in the middle of that because it won't look good. Instead, you can use this as a great opportunity to stack them towards one end or the other, and what you end up getting is what's called easing. So that means that you're easing in or you're easing out. So in this case, I'm easing out here because it slowly moves out, and then I'm kind of easing in here because it's got a little slow here, right? Not too much though, right? And then the best part about this is if you did this exact same animation, but you just tweak these each time, the position of these, you're going to get a really different feel. So you can have an infinite variety of head turns, even though it's just a head turn. You can have an infinite variety of runs, even though it's just a run. So this is what actually gives you a chart or a graph of like how your animation is going to feel before you even decide what character you're drawing, before you even decide what's moving. You know, this could be a baseball moving across here, or it could be a head turn, or it could be a squirrel jumping. The important part is that this thing gives me my timing and my space. And both of those are super important in animation. So now that we have it all laid out, I can count this out. I go 1, 2, 3, 4. The breakdown is 5. This is going to be 6, 7, and the keyframe 8. So we have 8 drawings that we're going to need to do, and we're going to keep them loose because animation comes in phases. So as you can already see, planning is really important. So first plan, think about what you're doing, plan it out. Then do some rough drawings, get the keyframes in, and then the breakdown. So I just drew them all in one layer. I'm not trying to make things more complicated than they need to be. Just drew them all in one layer, and then what I did is I started breaking out all these frames. So there, just redraw it. It's not hard. Just draw it again. And because you're going to draw it again, like these are still rough. So you're going to have to come back and ink them and make really clean drawings. That happens, you know, later, and then you color them and all that stuff. So it happens in phases. Right now we're getting the motion. So what's important isn't to have a perfect drawing or a perfect line. You know, that's a circle, that's enough. What's important is that the drawings fit together and the motion moves correctly and it feels right. Once you get that, then you can start cleaning the drawings up. So you can see I have a little color-coded thing to make this very obvious for you guys, but also for myself. This is key 1 in red, key 8 in red. So the keys are in red and then the breakdowns are in blue. Okay, so this is a simple one. So we only have 2 keys and 1 breakdown. But by putting these things like this, I know that these are the important ones, and then these little ones in here are less important. They're still important, but they're in-betweens, okay? So as I scroll through this animation, you can see my key, my on 2, my on 3, and then my on 4, and then bam, we're going to our blur frame. We're snapping a long distance, so that's why we can have this distorted frame. And then boom, we come to our 6, our 7, and then finally cushion to our 8, okay? So that motion there is what creates a soft start, because you can see they're stacked up there. The big blur snaps over, and then at the end we have a little cushion. And then that effect, again, when we play it, is that you get that snappiness. Now, if I take out my guide, you can really feel that. And you can see that we're using that timing just that we have up ahead, up here, up above. We're using that timing and we're using that spacing. And because we planned it out, when we did the drawings, first of all, the drawings were a lot easier to draw because I knew exactly where to put them. And I knew exactly, you know, what timing they were going to have. And then all I had to really figure out was, you know, how do I want to make the expressions on the face? What angle should it be at? And so on. So even with a simple, really simple character like this, you can see that a lot of thought actually goes into it. I still draw it as a sphere because I'm thinking about it as a 3D thing because I have to rotate it, right? So I still draw this. Some people like draw like a face and then they draw like an X on it, right? This isn't an X. Be careful with that. It's actually a sphere. So it's a round thing here and a round thing here going around the sphere. And like an orbit. You want to think about it as a round thing because that's going to be important when you rotate the sphere. So when you rotate it this way, now let's say we want him to look down. Now I think about this and he can look down because I can draw like that. So now he's looking more down. And then I can also think, but I want him to stay this, right? I want him to stay at the same, you know, left to right. So now I can draw his, you know, his eyes are here and his eyes are here. And now it looks like he's looking down, right? So that's the kind of stuff that you just want to kind of have in your head. And if it's hard to keep in your head, and that's hard, then draw it. Don't worry about it. You know, make your paper dirty, make your screen dirty, because you're just going to use this as a guide and redraw it when you ink it anyway. So don't think about this as a final drawing. You do not go from 0 to a perfect drawing in animation. You have to do it in phases. Okay, so you can see that these in-betweens are pretty normal. I'm tweaking his angles and stuff, but I'm not worrying too much about distorting him, except when I get to here, when he speeds up, that's when I really distort his face. And the reason why is when you have a lot of motion really fast. So what I mean by that is when you cover a lot of distance with not a lot of time, that's when you have the opportunity to do some weird deformation stuff. And those are the funnest frames. So whether someone's like coming and hitting the ground and they're like squashing and getting crushed, or whether they're jumping up in the air and so they're just really stretched out, this is your one opportunity to basically break the character. You don't have to worry about their proportions. You don't have to worry about preserving volume. When you're doing these extreme things, you just do what feels right, and you just do what's fun, frankly. Like if you want to draw the character being all wobbly and messed up and weird, just try it, because you get all these cool effects that you wouldn't even have guessed at. Even if your character is like pretty realistic, you can get away with turning them into like a blob thing and then just like put a head on there for this one frame, because this frame is about motion and it's not about perfect anatomy and stuff like that. And then the perfect anatomy, you put those on these frames where stuff's slow and people can watch it. But on this frame, you just screw with it, and then it feels really good when it comes back to rest. Okay, so that's a really simple head turn, but I hope that was useful for you guys. I would hope that if you have any questions that you ask them so I can answer those. But this is just a basic way to approach a simple animation. However, there is no difference between this simple animation and a complex one. It's the same stuff. You just have to break down a complex one into more of these scenes of kind of motion scenes, which would be, breaking down the motion from this little guy into, a more complicated thing. If you had like 100 frames, you got to just break it down and take it as you go to understand it, right? So, but between keyframes, you can always do this, and it's always going to help you out. So the one last thing I want to touch on before we end this episode, I'm going to definitely do some more on animation. We're going to look at some cool stuff. But one thing I want to just show you guys that's really cool is once you have your timing and your spacing, the cool thing is you can take this and abstract it and transfer it to any other motion. So for instance, if you like the way that this head turn feels, where it's slow at the beginning and then it snaps and then it cushions at the end, and you're like, that feels kind of good. Maybe that could be something else. Maybe that could be like a punch, or like maybe that could be someone catching a baseball or something. You can transfer the timing and the spacing to another animation. You still got to draw it again, but here's how you do that. Decide your start point, right? And get your motion curve. So let's say we're going to have a curvier curve. So now our motion curve looks like this. And let's say we're going to do a third one just to try out a third one. That's like sharp. Okay. So let's put our key here. That's going to be key 1. Let's put our end key here. So this is key 8. Same thing here. We got key 1. And here we have key 8. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm loosely going to take this chart and I'm going to transfer the idea of this chart into these charts. Now, it doesn't have to be the same length, as you can see. It doesn't have to be the same length here. It could be this long. In fact, let's do that too. Here, let's make one that's this long that just kind of curves around like that. So here, and this is going to be K1, this is going to be K8. And now all I'm doing is I'm taking the idea of this and breaking it to here. So first we need our breakdown on 5. And you can see that that is not in the middle, it's to the left of the middle with like a good chunk to the left. So let's say that that's the middle of this path. So let's go over to here, right? Maybe a little bit less because this is a smaller path, right? So let's say that breakdown, so BD5 here. All right, let's do the same thing here. So this goes there. The middle of it is kind of, because this is long, is like here. And again, you can eyeball this, it's okay. It's motion. So you don't have to actually be exact about this to the millimeter. So let's say halfway is about here. So we're going to move over a little bit. So, oh, cool. Our BD kind of comes right on this little bump, which that's cool. So here's BD5. So that's neat. Okay, so, and then our little one here. So again, that's halfway. So we're going to move a little bit over because this line is so much shorter. So then that's our BD5. So our breakdown on frame 5. Okay, so I think you guys see where I'm going with this, but now all we have to do is kind of follow that. So this is going to be stacked at the beginning here, but it's squashed because it's a smaller thing. And then we have 2 at the end here that are spaced out a little bit more than they are here. So we got our 1 and then our 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Same thing here, same thing here. So we're going to stack 3 at the beginning, move over here, stack 2 at the end. They're spaced a little bit more. In fact, spaced even a little bit more. Yeah, good. All right, so these ones are going to be spaced because we got some zags here. Let's space 1 here and 1 here so we can have something to indicate this little sharp point. And then we have 3 here. Let's put 1 here, 1 here, and then 1 here because, again, we got to have a frame at these extremes, right? So adjusting this one a little bit just to fit this curve, but it's going to be very similar timing. So now we have our 2, our 3, our 4, our 5, our 6, our 7, and our 8. Same thing here. Okay, here's our 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Same thing here. Okay, so what we've done is we've taken the idea of a motion, its space and its time, and we have transferred it to these completely other charts. Now, if I take one of these charts as a guide and do the same thing, I do a head turn, or I do a hand flipping over and catching a ball, or I do a bullet following a path, or someone pulling out a sword. The cool thing is what I animate is actually separate from the timing and the space of the animation, which means that I can abstract it like this. I can actually pull the motion out and save that motion as an idea in my head, and then I can reuse this idea over and over again. I can actually animate different things with this motion. So that is pretty cool. And we're coming up on time here. So if that seems a little bit too heady and too deep and too like abstract for you guys, don't worry. I'm going to do the next video on this about actually drawing some animation to these different charts, even though it's the same timing, same amount of drawings, 8 drawings, and it's the same kind of speed. We're going to get totally different animations, and you're going to see how they feel similar, even though they're actually different things. So that's just a way to approach this, and I hope that's helpful for you guys. Again, if you have any questions, if you're confused by anything, put it in the comments, and I'll see you next time. We'll take a look at more of this animation stuff.
Yamsketch.